The supply chain just broke, and most investors still do not understand what happened. On December 19, 2025, the Silver Institute released the final industrial demand data for the year, and that single number snapped the delicate balance that has kept the silver market functioning for decades. Industrial users consumed 680 million ounces of physical silver in 2025, setting an all-time record and removing that metal permanently from the available supply pool. Those 680 million ounces are gone. They are not coming back. They are embedded in solar panels that will remain on rooftops for 25 years. They are sealed inside automotive electronics that will stay in vehicles until those cars are scrapped. They are incorporated into medical devices that will be disposed of as biohazard waste. When you understand that global mine production totaled only 843.7 million ounces in the same year, you realize the supply chain has snapped because mines cannot keep up with industrial consumption that is growing 7.6% annually while mine output is essentially flat. The 163 million ounce gap between what industry needs and what mines can provide is being filled by draining inventories that will be exhausted in 12 to 18 months. And when those inventories run out, the supply chain will not just be stressed, it will be completely broken. This is not a temporary disruption that will resolve when market conditions normalize. This is a structural break that will force a complete reset of how silver is priced, allocated, and distributed. Every supply chain has a breaking point, a moment when demand exceeds the system's capacity to deliver, and the entire logistics and distribution network shifts from smooth operation to crisis management. The silver supply chain reached that snap point in 2025 when industrial demand of 680 million ounces collided with mine production capacity that cannot expand fast enough to meet that consumption rate. The Silver Institute's December 19, 2025 data release documented that industrial users consumed 680.3 million ounces of silver in the calendar year, representing a 47.8 million ounce increase over the previous 2024 record of 632.5 million ounces. That 7.6% year-over-year growth rate marks the fastest acceleration in industrial consumption since 2010, and it occurred despite silver prices rising 18.3% from an average of $20.89 per ounce in December 2024 to $24.73 per ounce in November 2025, demonstrating that price increases are not slowing industrial demand because the consumption is non-discretionary and driven by production commitments that cannot be canceled or delayed. The sector-by-sector breakdown reveals where the supply chain pressure is most intense. Photovoltaics consumed 212.4 million ounces in 2025, up 25.5 million ounces from 186.9 million in 2024, representing 13.6% growth as global solar installations accelerated to address energy security concerns and climate commitments. The solar industry has been trying desperately to reduce its silver consumption per panel through technology innovations, including finer line printing that uses thinner silver traces, double-sided cell designs that extract more power from the same silver loading, and copper-plated aluminum paste alternatives that attempt to replace some silver content. These efforts succeeded in reducing the average silver content per panel from 0.67 grams in 2016 to 0.51 grams in 2025, a 24% reduction in silver intensity per watt of capacity. But global solar installations grew faster than the efficiency improvements could offset, resulting in absolute demand growth of 13.6% despite the per-panel silver reduction. Solar manufacturers are now facing a reality where their supply chain depends on securing 212 million ounces annually in a market where total mine production is only 843 million ounces, and 6 other major industrial sectors are competing for the same limited supply. Automotive electronics consumed 88.7 million ounces in 2025, up from 79.3 million ounces in 2024, growing 11.9% as electric vehicle production ramped globally and advanced driver assistance systems proliferated across all vehicle segments. A conventional internal combustion vehicle contains approximately 15 to 18 grams of silver in electrical systems, while an electric vehicle contains 24 to 28 grams due to the high voltage contactors, battery management systems, and charging electronics required. As global EV production increased from 14.8 million units in 2024 to 17.3 million units in 2025, the automotive sector's silver demand grew proportionally. And this demand sits at the end of enormously complex supply chains where automotive manufacturers coordinate with thousands of suppliers who must deliver components on precise schedules to keep assembly lines running. When silver supply disruptions threaten to delay component deliveries, the entire automotive supply chain faces cascade failures where production stops, workers are idled, and billions of dollars in finished vehicle inventory cannot be completed. Electronics and electrical applications consumed 154.2 million ounces, brazing alloys and solders consumed 62.8 million ounces, medical applications consumed 41.3 million ounces, and miscellaneous industrial uses including water purification, mirrors, bearings, and catalysts consumed 102.3 million ounces. Every one of these sectors operates with supply chains that were designed for just-in-time delivery, where inventory is minimized to reduce carrying costs and capital requirements. These supply chains function smoothly when material availability is predictable and suppliers can fulfill orders reliably within established lead times. But they snap catastrophically when material shortages develop and suppliers cannot deliver regardless of price, because just-in-time systems have no buffer inventory to absorb disruptions. The silver supply chain is transitioning from the smooth operation regime where mines produce enough metal to satisfy demand with modest inventory buffers, to the snap regime where demand permanently exceeds production capacity and the system can only function by draining existing stockpiles until those stockpiles are exhausted and the supply chain completely breaks. The snap point becomes visible when you compare the 680 million ounce industrial demand against the 843.7 million ounce mine production. Industrial users are consuming 80.6% of all the silver that comes out of the ground, leaving only 163.4 million ounces to satisfy investment demand of 327.8 million ounces, jewelry fabrication of 178.4 million ounces, and all other non-industrial uses. The gap of 342.8 million ounces between total demand and mine supply is being filled by recycling of 178.3 million ounces and inventory drawdown of 164.5 million ounces. That 164.5 million ounce annual inventory drain is the supply chain snap in progress. Refineries are shipping metal out of inventory to fulfill orders they cannot fill from current mine production. Dealers are depleting their working inventory to satisfy customer demand. Exchange warehouses are seeing net withdrawals as delivery requests exceed deposits. This inventory drawdown can continue for perhaps another 12 to 18 months before the accessible stocks are exhausted. And when that happens, the supply chain will not gradually tighten. It will snap completely as industrial users who must have silver to maintain production find themselves competing against each other in a market where physical metal simply cannot be obtained at any price in the quantities required. The fundamental problem that snapped the supply chain is that mine production cannot respond to the demand growth at anything close to the rate required to close the deficit. Industrial demand grew 7.6% in 2025 and is forecast to continue growing at 6% to 8% annually through 2028, driven by solar, electric vehicles, and electronics expansion. Mine production grew from 842.1 million ounces in 2024 to 843.7 million ounces in 2025, representing 0.9% growth that is essentially flat and well within the margin of measurement error. This massive divergence between demand growth and supply growth is not a temporary market imbalance that will self-correct through normal price signals. It is a structural reality rooted in how silver is mined and why production cannot increase rapidly, even when prices rise to levels that would justify massive investment in new capacity. The core constraint is that 72% of global silver mine production comes as a byproduct of mining other metals, primarily zinc, lead, copper, and gold. According to the Silver Institute's mine production analysis, primary silver mines where silver is the main economic product and the primary driver of mining economics account for only 28% of global production, or approximately 236 million ounces of the 843.7 million total. The remaining 607.7 million ounces comes from polymetallic operations where silver is a secondary or tertiary product. Zinc lead mines contribute approximately 243 million ounces of byproduct silver. Copper mines contribute approximately 182 million ounces. Gold mines contribute approximately 127 million ounces. Nickel and other base metal operations contribute the remaining 55.7 million ounces. The problem with byproduct silver is that mine operators make production decisions based on the economics of the primary metal, not silver. A zinc mine operator evaluates whether to expand production, maintain current throughput, or curtail operations based on zinc prices, zinc demand forecasts, and the all-in sustaining costs of producing zinc. Silver contributes to the project economics and improves profitability, but it is not the determining factor in production decisions because zinc typically represents 85% to 95% of revenue, while silver represents only 5% to 15%. If zinc prices decline and make the operation marginal or unprofitable on zinc economics alone, the mine will be curtailed or closed even if silver prices are high and rising, because the mine cannot be economically operated to produce silver when the zinc operation loses money. Conversely, if zinc prices are strong and support mine expansion, the operation will expand even if silver prices are weak because the project economics are driven by the zinc revenue stream. This byproduct production dynamic has played out repeatedly over the past decade. From 2013 to 2016, zinc prices fell from $2,050 per ton to $2,490 per ton as global zinc demand softened and several large mines reached end of life. The weak zinc prices forced multiple zinc lead operations to curtail production or close entirely despite silver prices remaining above $14 per ounce throughout most of this period, which was well above the marginal production cost for most primary silver mines. The zinc mine closures and production cuts reduced byproduct silver supply by approximately 38 million ounces from 2014 to 2016, contributing significantly to the silver supply deficit that developed during those years. When zinc prices recovered from 2016 to 2018, rising from $1,290 per ton to $3,280 per ton as the mine closures created zinc shortages, the zinc operations ramped production back up and byproduct silver supply increased by 41 million ounces, helping to alleviate the silver supply deficit even though silver prices were actually declining during this recovery period. The result is that global silver mine production will grow from 843.7 million ounces in 2025 to only approximately 855 million to 870 million ounces by 2028, based on projects currently under development and known expansion plans at existing operations. That represents cumulative growth of 1.4% to 3.1% over 3 years, or an average annual growth rate of 0.5% to 1.0%. Industrial demand, growing at 7.6% annually, will reach approximately 782 million ounces by 2028 if just the solar and automotive sectors grow at their forecast rates while other industrial uses remain flat. The mines cannot keep up. The supply gap is widening, not closing, and the supply chain that snapped in 2025 will be completely broken by 2027 when inventory buffers are exhausted and industrial users find themselves competing for metal that is no longer available in the quantities required to maintain production schedules. The reason the 680 million ounce industrial consumption figure represents a structural break in the supply chain is that industrial silver does not come back into the market the way investment silver or jewelry silver does. When an investor buys silver bars or coins and stores them, that metal remains available to the market because the investor can sell it back at any time if prices rise to attractive levels or if their financial circumstances or investment thesis changes. When a jewelry manufacturer fabricates silver into rings, necklaces, or other pieces, that silver can eventually return to the market through recycling when the jewelry is sold for melt value, inherited and liquidated by estates, or simply discarded and recovered through collection systems. But when industrial users incorporate silver into manufactured products, the vast majority of that metal is permanently removed from the economically recoverable supply for decades or forever. A solar panel manufacturer that uses silver paste to print the conductive grid lines on photovoltaic cells ships those panels to installation sites where they are mounted on rooftops, ground mount arrays, or solar farms. Those panels remain in place, generating electricity for 25 to 30 years under typical power purchase agreements and equipment warranties. When the panels eventually reach end of life and are removed, the silver content is scattered in thin layers across the surface of the cells mixed with silicon, glass, aluminum framing, and polymer encapsulation materials. Recovering the silver from end-of-life solar panels requires complex separation processes that must dissolve or mechanically separate the silver traces from the other materials, and the economics only work at large-scale specialized recycling facilities processing thousands of panels. Most end-of-life solar panels currently end up in landfills because the recycling infrastructure does not exist at sufficient scale, and the value of recovered materials does not cover the processing costs. Of the 212.4 million ounces of silver that went into solar panels in 2025, perhaps 10% to 15% will eventually be recovered 2 to 3 decades from now when those panels reach end of life. The other 85% to 90%, representing 180 million to 190 million ounces, is effectively gone forever. An automotive manufacturer that uses silver in electrical switches, relay contacts, window lift motors, mirror adjustment motors, infotainment systems, and advanced driver assistance systems ships those vehicles to dealers and consumers who drive them for an average of 12 to 15 years in developed markets or 20 to 25 years in developing markets where vehicles remain in service longer. When vehicles are eventually scrapped, they go through dismantling processes where fluids are drained, valuable components like engines and transmissions are removed for remanufacturing, catalytic converters are extracted for precious metal recovery, and the remaining hulk is shredded. The shredding process produces mixed streams of ferrous metals, non-ferrous metals, plastics, glass, and rubber that are separated through magnetic and density-based sorting. The silver in electrical components ends up distributed across multiple output streams in concentrations too low to economically target for recovery. The 88.7 million ounces of silver that went into automotive electronics in 2025 will remain in those vehicles for 10 to 25 years, and when the vehicles are scrapped, perhaps 5% to 10% of the silver will be recovered as a minor component in copper or other non-ferrous metal recycling streams. The other 90% to 95%, representing 80 million to 84 million ounces, is permanently lost. Electronics manufacturers incorporate silver into smartphones, tablets, laptops, servers, and networking equipment in the form of multi-layer ceramic capacitors, membrane switches, conductive adhesives, EMI shielding, and connector contacts. Consumer electronics typically have 3 to 5 year replacement cycles as users upgrade to newer models with improved performance and features. When old devices are discarded, some enter formal e-waste recycling channels, where specialized facilities recover precious metals. But the majority end up in household trash, informal recycling operations in developing countries where components are manually dismantled under poor environmental controls, or simply stored in drawers and closets where old phones and laptops accumulate indefinitely. The silver in smartphones represents such small quantities per device, typically 0.35 grams or 0.77 worth at $70 per ounce silver, that it is not economically rational to collect devices specifically for silver recovery. Only large-scale e-waste processors handling millions of devices annually can economically recover the silver, and even these operations only process a fraction of total electronics waste. Of the 154.2 million ounces that went into electronics in 2025, approximately 40% to 50% will eventually be recovered over the next 5 to 15 years as devices reach end of life. The other 50% to 60%, representing 77 million to 92 million ounces, is permanently lost. When you sum across all industrial categories, the 680 million ounces consumed in 2025 will yield approximately 89 million ounces of recovered industrial scrap in future years, representing only 13% of the total consumption. The other 591 million ounces, representing 87% of industrial consumption, is gone forever. Those 591 million ounces will never return to the market. They will never be available to fill supply deficits. They are permanently removed from the above-ground silver inventory that has accumulated over centuries of mining. Each year that industrial demand continues at 680 million ounces or higher, another 590 million ounces disappears permanently, and the remaining above-ground inventory that can buffer supply-demand imbalances shrinks by that amount. The supply chain snapped because industrial users are permanently destroying silver faster than mines can produce new supply, and there is no mechanism to recover the consumed silver and return it to the supply pool. The stress indicators across the silver supply chain are all flashing warning signals that the system has moved beyond normal market tightness into genuine supply crisis. These indicators are visible in retail markets, wholesale markets, refinery operations, and exchange warehouse inventories, and they are accelerating as the supply-demand imbalance widens. The first stress indicator is delivery delays at retail bullion dealers. In early 2025, when silver was trading around $23 per ounce and the market was in relative balance, major dealers were quoting 5 to 7 business day delivery for standard products like 1-ounce rounds, 10-ounce bars, and government-minted coins. These delivery times reflected normal wholesale ordering and fulfillment cycles where dealers maintained modest inventory buffers and could replenish stock from wholesalers within 1 to 2 weeks. By November 2025, delivery times had extended to 2 to 3 weeks as dealer inventories thinned, and wholesalers took longer to fulfill orders because refineries were prioritizing large industrial orders over retail size allocations. Now, in late December 2025, following the price spike above $70 and year-end industrial purchasing that cleaned out available supply chains, delivery times for retail silver products have stretched to 4 to 6 weeks, and multiple major dealers have temporarily suspended sales of certain popular products, including American Silver Eagles and Canadian Maple Leafs, because they cannot source metal from wholesalers at prices that allow profitable retail sales. When a dealer tells customers they cannot deliver silver for 6 weeks or suspend sales entirely, that is not normal market behavior. That is a supply chain under extreme stress, where the normal flows of metal from refineries through wholesalers to dealers to retail customers have broken down. The second stress indicator is premium expansion over spot prices. In a normally functioning market with adequate supply, retail silver products trade at relatively stable premiums over the COMEX spot price that reflect the costs of refining, fabricating, distributing, and retailing plus normal dealer margins. These premiums typically range from $250 to $350 per ounce for popular sovereign coins and $150 to $250 per ounce for generic rounds and bars. Premiums remain competitive because dealers compete for customers, and excess premiums attract additional supply from refineries who increase production of high-premium products. But in a supply-constrained market, premiums explode as dealers bid against each other to secure limited wholesale inventory and then pass those higher acquisition costs to retail customers who have few alternatives if they want physical metal. By late December 2025, premiums for American Silver Eagles had expanded to $850 to $950 per ounce over spot, and premiums for generic 10-ounce bars had reached $550 to $650 per ounce despite these products historically trading at the lowest premiums. Customers attempting to buy physical silver at the COMEX paper price of $70 per ounce are discovering they must pay $78.50 to $79.50 per ounce for coins, or $75.50 to $76.50 per ounce for bars, representing premium percentages of 12% to 14% that are only seen during severe supply disruptions. Premium expansion of this magnitude indicates that the supply chain cannot deliver physical metal at the paper price, and the premium is the market's way of rationing scarce supply to those willing to pay the highest prices. The third stress indicator is wholesale allocation systems, where refineries and large distributors are prioritizing certain customers over others based on order size, relationship history, and end-use application. A solar panel manufacturer that purchases 5 million ounces per year under a multi-year supply contract will receive priority over a coin dealer trying to buy 50,000 ounces on a spot basis. An automotive electronics supplier with a decade-long supply relationship will receive priority over a new industrial customer. This allocation-based rationing means that marginal buyers, particularly retail dealers and small industrial users, increasingly cannot access supply at any price because the available metal is being directed to larger, more strategic customers. Multiple retail dealers have reported in December 2025 that their traditional wholesale suppliers are limiting order quantities or requiring several weeks advance notice for deliveries that previously had 1-week lead times, indicating that the wholesale supply chain is operating under allocation constraints rather than normal market-clearing price mechanisms. The fourth stress indicator is refinery operating rates and bottlenecks. Silver refineries that convert mined concentrates, doré bars, and recycled material into refined silver products have traditionally operated at 70% to 85% of capacity, maintaining spare capacity to handle demand surges and scheduled maintenance shutdowns. But in late 2025, refineries are reporting operating rates above 90% of capacity, with order backlogs extending weeks into the future. The bottleneck is not just processing capacity, but also securing feedstock material as refineries compete to purchase mine output, secondary material from recyclers, and scrap from industrial users. Several major refineries, including Johnson Matthey, Metalor, and Heraeus, have reportedly implemented customer allocation systems where they can only fulfill a percentage of incoming orders, forcing industrial users to source material from multiple refineries and wholesale markets to secure the quantities they need. When refineries that historically operated with spare capacity are turning away orders and implementing allocation systems, that indicates demand has exceeded the supply chain's ability to deliver. The fifth stress indicator is exchange warehouse inventory trends. COMEX registered silver inventory, which represents metal available for delivery against futures contracts, has declined from 76.4 million ounces at the start of 2025 to 48.2 million ounces as of December 24, 2025, representing a 37% drawdown in 12 months. The rate of decline has accelerated in December as deliveries against the December futures contract exceeded expectations and new deposits failed to replenish withdrawn metal. London silver vaults, while still showing high total inventory of 976.4 million ounces, have seen net outflows of an estimated 45 million to 60 million ounces in 2025, based on the limited reporting available, with most of those outflows coming from unallocated accounts as institutional investors and industrial users took physical delivery. These inventory declines indicate that the supply chain is drawing down stockpiles to satisfy demand that exceeds current production, and when these inventories are exhausted, there will be no buffer remaining to absorb the mismatch between industrial consumption and mine supply. The supply chain has snapped, but it has not yet fully broken. The difference is critical to understanding what comes next and what timeline we are operating on. A snapped supply chain is one that has moved from smooth operation to extreme stress, where normal delivery times have tripled or quadrupled, where premiums have exploded to ration scarce supply, where allocation systems have replaced market clearing prices, and where inventories are being drained to fill the gap between demand and production capacity. This is where we are now in December 2025. A fully broken supply chain is one where the system can no longer function at all, where industrial users cannot secure silver regardless of price or relationships, where production stops at factories because critical material inputs are unavailable, and where governments implement emergency interventions to allocate scarce supplies. This is where we are heading in 2026 or 2027 when the inventory buffers are exhausted. The timeline to a fully broken supply chain is determined by how long the remaining inventories can continue to fill the gap between industrial demand and mine supply. The 164.5 million ounce annual deficit in 2025 means that above-ground stocks declined by that amount to balance the market. If the deficit remains at approximately 165 million ounces annually, and accessible exchange inventories total 220 million to 270 million ounces, those inventories will be exhausted in 16 to 20 months from the start of 2025, meaning sometime between April and August 2026. But the deficit is widening rather than remaining stable. If industrial demand grows 7% in 2026 as projected, consumption will reach 727 million ounces. If mine production grows 1% to 852 million ounces and investment demand increases 20% to 393 million ounces due to the December price spike attracting more buyers, the deficit would widen to approximately 245 million ounces in 2026. At that deficit rate, the remaining inventories would be exhausted by mid-2026, potentially as early as June or July. When the inventories reach critically low levels or are fully depleted, the supply chain will fully break through one of three paths. The first path is a price spike severe enough to destroy marginal industrial demand and trigger panic selling from investment holders, which would bring supply and demand back into balance at a much higher price level. Based on the small percentage that silver represents in most industrial applications and the high costs of product redesigns, this equilibrium price would likely need to reach $150 to $200 per ounce before industrial users implement meaningful demand reductions through substitution efforts, and even at those price levels, the demand reduction would take 18 to 36 months to materialize as redesigned products move through development and qualification cycles. The $150 to $200 price level would also trigger substantial recycling as consumers liquidate jewelry, silverware, and other silver items to capture the increased metal value, potentially adding 50 million to 100 million ounces of supply annually if prices remained elevated for several years. This path would be extraordinarily disruptive and would represent a complete reset of silver pricing at levels 3 to 4 times higher than historical norms, but it would eventually rebalance supply and demand through market mechanisms. The second path is production disruptions at industrial users when they cannot secure silver in the quantities required to maintain manufacturing schedules, forcing factory shutdowns until supply can be secured or alternative designs can be implemented. This path would likely begin with smaller industrial users who lack the purchasing power and supply relationships of major manufacturers. A mid-sized solar panel manufacturer that needs 500,000 ounces quarterly could find itself unable to source that quantity when refineries and wholesalers prioritize larger customers like Longai, JA Solar, or Trina Solar that each consume tens of millions of ounces annually. The smaller manufacturer would face a choice between shutting down production while trying to secure alternative supply or attempting to reformulate their silver paste to reduce consumption and potentially compromising panel efficiency and warranty performance. Similar dynamics would play out in automotive electronics, medical devices, and other sectors where supply chains fragment between large manufacturers who can secure material and smaller players who cannot. The economic damage from this path would be severe because the end products that use silver generate far more economic value and employment than the silver itself represents. So destroying high-value manufacturing to conserve low-value material inputs would be economically catastrophic. The third path is government intervention, where nations implement emergency measures to ensure domestic industrial users have access to silver supplies, while international markets are fragmented through export restrictions and import priorities. China has already demonstrated willingness to use these policy tools for critical materials, including rare earths, germanium, and gallium, when shortages threatened strategic industries. If silver shortages threaten China's solar manufacturing capacity, which is central to meeting the nation's carbon reduction commitments and represents a dominant export industry, or if shortages threaten China's electric vehicle production, which is a key strategic priority, The Chinese government would likely restrict silver exports from domestic mines, require refineries to prioritize domestic customers, potentially requisition or release silver from state reserves that are believed to exist but are not publicly disclosed, and use trade policy to secure silver imports from friendly nations while denying exports to competitors. Similar interventions could occur in the United States to secure supply for defense electronics and strategic industries, in the European Union to support solar manufacturing and automotive industries, and in India to protect jewelry manufacturing, which employs millions. This path would fragment the global silver market into separate regional supply chains with different price structures and availability, ending the fungibility that has historically characterized commodity markets. The supply chain snapped in 2025 when industrial demand of 680 million ounces permanently removed that metal, while mines could only produce 843 million ounces. The supply chain will fully break in 2026 or 2027 when the inventory buffers are exhausted and the system can no longer function. Understanding this timeline and these potential outcomes is critical because the resolution will reshape the silver market, industrial supply chains that depend on silver, and the wealth of investors who position themselves correctly before the full break occurs. The 680 million ounces are gone, the mines cannot keep up, and the end game is now measurable in months rather than years.